Everyone in the city knew his name, CEO Sullivan, CEO of Sullivan Enterprises. His name echoed through the concrete arteries of downtown, whispered in luxury lounges, and traded like currency in elite circles. A mine of numbers, steel, impenetrable. Silence. At 36, he stood at the helm of one of the most powerful multinational corporations in the world. His empire spanned finance, technology, pharmaceuticals, and media. He dignity led with charm or charisma, he ruled with precision, fear, an unwavering detachment that left even his closest board members guessing what he would do next. Jackson de dignité smiled. He calculated. Every expression, every word, every silence was intentional. He walked like a chimney bent for him, like the world adjusted to his existence. At 6'3", with a chiseled jawline and storm gray eyes, he could have graced magazine covers, but instead, he graced corporate headlines. Billion-dollar mergers, ruthless acquisitions, legal battles he never lost, and always alone. His mornings began in darkness. At 4:30 a.m., he was already in motion alone in his private gym, lifting like he was exorcising demons. The only sound in the cavernous penthouse was the rhythmic breath of exertion in the low of classical music. By 5:30, he was suited in bespoke Italian fabric, shoes polished to a mirror shine, ready to face a world that both revered and feared him. The city watched as a fleet of black vehicles escorted him to his tower, the glass monolith known simply as Sullivan HQ. Employees called it the Icy Fortress. No one laughed inside those walls. You didn't joke in Jackson Sullivan's presence. You didn't stumble. You didn't speak unless spoken to. If you made a mistake, you didn't get a warning. You were erased. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. Executives trembled when summoned. Assistants cycled through weekly. No one could meet his expectations. And yet, the waiting list still worked under him stretched across continents. Everyone wanted a taste of that power, even if it meant being consumed by it. And then there were the women, the models, the heiresses, the actresses, all of them drawn to the myth of Jackson Sullivan like moths to an inferno. They came with flawless faces and dangerous intentions. They left with nothing but silence. He didn't fall in love. He didn't date. He didn't believe forever. Every woman was disposable, a fleeting amusement that left no impression. He didn't even remember most of their names. Rumors swirled that he'd been betrayed once, that he'd watched someone he loved die, that his heart had been broken so badly he'd locked it away for good. But those were only stories people told themselves to feel better about the way he treated them. The truth, Jackson Sullivan had never believed he loved to begin with. His penthouse reflected his mind, immaculate, minimalist, emotionless. White marble floors, black leather, a fireplace that never burned. Everything controlled, nothing accidental. Even the artwork was chosen for its emotional neutrality, abstract lines in monochrome, beauty, but never warmth. At night, he stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, sipping 60-year-old Scotch dignity and joy, staring though at the world he'd conquered. A silent monarchy, his lonely kingdom. His phone never rang unless it was business. He never celebrated birthdays, never took vacations. His calendar was a fortress of efficiency. Meetings, flights, mergers. He moved through chimney like it showed him something like he was constantly chasing an undefined enemy. But no one ever asked him what he was running from, because no one dared get close enough. Till the world, he was flawless. Till himself, he was untouchable. And yet, beneath the armor, behind the impeccable suits and ruthless decisions, there was something else. A restlessness, a silence that no amount of success could fill. He didn't know what it was. Or maybe, he refused to look too closely, because deep down, even the strongest fortress knows, it was built to keep something out, or someone in. He had spent his entire life making sure no one ever got it, until the day she walked into his world, not with a storm, but with silence. From that moment on, the man who had everything would begin to lose control. Each began with a signature, one contract, one name, one quiet agreement sealed behind the closed doors of a mahogany-paneled boardroom. Her name was Elise Hartwell. Till the media, it was a surprise, a shock, even. Headlines exploded across Financial, tabloids and society blogs. The untouchable CEO marries a stranger. Whispers of scandal and speculation flooded every corner of high society. Was she pregnant? Was this a PR stunt? Was Jack-So Sullivan finally falling in love? None of them were even close. The truth was far colder. It was a marriage of necessity, not affection. Sullivan Enterprises was on the brink of a delicate expansion, one that required stabilizing certain assets, including a fractured alliance with the Hartwell conglomerate, an old money dynasty with deep political connections and legacy capital. The merger between the companies demanded a show of unity, a gesture of permanence, something binding, a marriage. In Elise, she was the perfect solution, a pawn placed with surgical precision. The quiet daughter of Reginald Hartwell, a woman with no scandal attached to her name, no record of rebellion, no trace of drama. She had studied abroad, lived in shadows, moved in silence, and most importantly she obeyed. Or so they thought. The ceremony was private. No guests, no smiles. Just the flick of a pen on paper, the cold exchange of hugs, and a moment of sterile silence in a candlelit room. You are now husband and wife, the officiant said. Jackson did not look at her. He was already on his phone, dictating instructions. Tell his legal team. She stood beside them in a custom Dior gown, her hands still trembling beneath her gloves, and realized she was not a bride. She was a placeholder. Their wedding night was quiet. He did not touch her, did not speak, did not even sleep in the same room. Instead, he handed her a non-disclosure agreement in detailed itinerary of expectations, appearances at corporate events, shared dinners for the press, and weekly check-ins with their PR teams. No affection, no personal questions, no illusions. You will have your freedom within limits, he said. Eyes never met hers. Do not step beyond them. She nodded, not because she agreed but because she understood the game. The press exploded with photos, perfect shots of them walking side by side, never touching. Headlines crafted fairy tales. But those inside the company whispered a different truth, that Elise Hartwell was just another piece on the board. Jack-So Sullivan did not play with pieces, he replaced them. Till the outside world, she was Cinderella. Till Jack-So, she was invisible. Weeks passed. She learned the rhythm of his coldness, the way he left before dawn, the way he returned after midnight, the way he never once asked her how she was adapting to his world. He did not notice when she changed her hair. He did not comment when she stopped eating dinner. He never once addressed her by her first name. Elise was never spoken aloud in that penthouse. She was her, a shadow moving quietly from room to room. She was not allowed in the private study. She was not allowed to speak to certain staff. Every inch of that home was curated for silence. She had access to everything except him. And yet, Elise watched, listened, memorized. In public, she played the haughty, smiled when required, wore gowns that cost more than her annual salary before the marriage, walked with practiced grace. But, inside, something deeper stirred, because Elise was not a pawn, not truly. She had agreed to the marriage for her family, yes, but she was not naive. She knew what each meant to survive in a world built by men like Jack-So Sullivan. And silently, in the background of his empire, she started to map its cracks. She observed his board meetings from a distance, catching the subtle shifts in loyalty between executives. She noted which assistants stayed and which fled. She learned names, positions, hidden alliances. She walked the house of Sullivan Agaki with her ears open and her presence muted. And all the while, Jack-So remained oblivious. Till him, she was a ghost in designer shoes. Till her, he was an empire she would one day understand, perhaps even surpass. But every woman has her threshold, and Elise's silence would not last forever, because behind every mask of obedience is a fire waiting to be federação. And one night, the match would finally strike. The days became a blur of routines and rehearsed performances. Elise Hartwell had mastered invisibility. She had become an expert in silence. Her footsteps made no sound on the marble floors of the penthouse. Her presence in the office went largely unnoticed except by those who underestimated her. And those were the ones she studied most carefully. She was no longer shocked by Jack-So's indifference, no longer surprised by the way he could walk past her without a single glance. She expected the silence, counted on each, because silence gave her time, space, room to move. And so, while he buried himself in emergency cold-blooded corporate warfare, Elise began to read contracts, annual reports, press releases. She devoured every document that passed through the channels of Sullivan Enterprises. She spent nights in the library of the penthouse, studying economics, corporate law, and the intricate architecture of power. No one noticed. Because no one looked. She had become a fixture. A beautiful, mute sculpture positioned precisely for optics. But beneath that polished exterior, her mind was gathering like a storm. It started small. An executive assistant made a snide remark about her luck at a gala. Elise smiled, remembered his name. The next week, he was let go discreetly, without her involvement. But she knew things now, knew how to speak to the right person, at the right time, with the right tone of suggestion. She wasn't manipulating. She was learning to navigate. At another event, the wife of a rival CEO called her a pretty little puppet behind a flute of champagne. Elise laughed softly, clinked her glass, e let it pass along a tip that unraveled a private deal that woman's husband had tried to hide. Not revenge, just leverage. And slowly, she began to carve out a space of influence, quiet, deliberate, unnoticed by Jackson. He didn't see it when she adjusted the seating order at a charity dinner to put the feuding partners side by side. He didn't notice when she whispered advice to a junior manager that saved a failing project. He certainly didn't see the way the company's social media presence evolved overnight, more polished, more human after she suggested a change to the PR director during an elevator ride. Because to him, Elise was still nothing, a silent wife, a contractual obligation, a detail, and he remained cold, unreachable. Their conversations were transactional, schedules, appearances, never personal, never intimate. At dinner, he barely spoke. During company events, he maintained the image of the composed, commanding CEO, a man with a wife but no attachment, a figure of myth, a shadow with a bank account. But others began to notice. Not her actions new, those were still too quiet, too subtle. They noticed her presence. Elise began to carry herself differently, straighter, stronger. There was no defiance in her posture, only certainty. She didn't interrupt, but when she spoke, her words were measured and they landed. She no longer dressed for the cameras. She dressed for herself. Tailored power suits, understated diamonds, a scarlet silk scarf that became her signature. People started to ask who she was. She never answered, because she wasn't ready yet. At home, she remained distant, cordial. She and Jackson lived like strangers in a mansion. Occasionally, she caught him looking at her, not with interest, not yet, but with curiosity, like he was trying to remember if he'd ever really looked at her before. He hadn't, but soon he would. Then came the board meeting. She hadn't been invited. She never was. But a scheduling error, perhaps fate, placed her in the hallway just outside the executive conference room as the door cracked open. She heard the words, "Mr. Sullivan, there are concerns about your judgment. This distraction is affecting shareholder confidence. It was directoramos, arrogant, hungry." Elise didn't move. She didn't need to hear the reply. She already knew Jackson would crush the dissent without blinking. But it wasn't the insult that stayed with her. It was the implication that she was a liability, that her presence in his life, however decorative, was a weakness. In that moment, something shifted. She wasn't angry. She was activated. That night, Jackson returned to find the lights low, the scent of jasmine lingering in the air, and Elise seated at the piano, playing something slow, haunting. He paused, watched her hands glide over the keys. She didn't look up. "You play," he said, for the first time in weeks, addressing her directly. Only when Yemi ignored, she replied without breaking rhythm. He didn't respond, didn't move, but something inside him stirred, and she felt it, that subtle tremor in the air, the first crack in his indifference. She smiled to herself, because the game was changing. And soon, the man who had spent his life alone at the top would realize he had never been in control. It happened on a Thursday. The day began like any other, mechanical, silent, cold. Jackson left the penthouse before dawn, his security detail in formation, his phone already pressed to his ear as he barked instructions into the void. Elise watched from the glass balcony, unnoticed as always, a ghost in silk, but something was different in the air, tighter, thinner. It began with a whisper at headquarters, a rumor circulating like wildfire behind tightly closed doors. There had been a breach, a leak. Sensitive documents from Sullivan Enterprises had surfaced in the hands of a rival conglomerate, Davenport International, and not just any documents, blueprints, future acquisition strategies, classified negotiations with government agencies. Billions were now at stake. Within hours, the boardroom erupted into chaos. Faces pallid, voices raised, fingers pointed. Jackson stood at the center like the eye of the storm, unmoved. His voice cut through the tension like a scalpel. Find the source. He didn't shout. He never needed to. But for the first time, there was something beneath the surface. Not fear, not anger. It was doubt. That night, Elise waited. She'd heard the news before it hit the media. Her phone had lit up with quiet messages from contacts she'd quietly cultivated, people who once dismissed her as invisible. They didn't anymore. Jackson arrived late. His steps were heavier than usual. He didn't acknowledge her as he poured himself a drink, his hands unusually still. "You heard," he said, finally. "Yes," she replied calmly, rising from the sofa with deliberate grace. "The leak wasn't internal," he continued. "It was deliberate." She said nothing. "They think it was me," he added, voice quieter now. "Oh, someone close to me." Elise felt the blow before he said it. The accusation wrapped the implication. The blade he couldn't bear to wield outright. She turned, slowly, her expression unreadable. "Do you believe that?" she asked. He didn't answer. That was answer enough. And for the first time in months, Elise let the silence burn. "You don't see me," she said, stepping toward him. "Not really. You've never asked what I know. What have you learned? You never wondered how I spend my time while you disappear into boardrooms and power plays. But have you seen everything, Jackson? I know this company better than half your executive." Timmy, his eyes narrowed. "You he implying something. Yemi stating a fact," she snapped, the control in her voice cracking just slightly. "Have you been watching while you pretended you wasn't there? And now, when something goes wrong suddenly, Yemi visible again? Suddenly, Yemi convenient to suspect? You didn't say it was you," he said flatly. "You didn't have to," she replied, her voice dropping like ice. "Because the moment you looked at me with doubt, it was already over." She turned away, her breath ragged, heart pounding. Jackson watched her for a long moment. "You want to be part of this world," he said coldly, "but you don't understand the weight of it. The stakes, the pressure." She spun on him. "I understand. More than you ever will," she said, stepping forward. "Because if you had to carry the weight of your silence, the stakes of your indifference, you act like you're the only one who bleeds for this empire, but if you've been bleeding in silence every day since I stepped into your shadow." And then, without warning, everything cracked. The fire alarm rang out across the building. Elise and Jackson froze. A staff member rushed in, panic in his eyes. There is a situation on the 43 RD floor server room. It is not a drill. Jackson didn't wait. He stormed out, Elise on his heels. They descended into chaos, security scrambling, fire systems blaring, the smell of smoke barely perceptible in the air. But when they reached the server room, there was no fire, only destruction. The systems had been wiped, deliberately. Jackson stood in the doorway, staring at the blinking headlights of failure. The data, the archives, years of encrypted planning gone in seconds, and on the ground, a message. One phrase, scrawled in marker on the wall: "A kingdom built on cold will always burn." Jackson's expression didn't change, but Elise saw it. The flicker, the fracture. He turned slowly to her. "You did this?" he whispered. In that moment, broke her. "No," she said, with a voice like stone. "But I should have." He stared at her, truly stared, for the first time. In that moment, Jackson Sullivan, the untouchable king of concrete and glass, realized he had no idea who his wife really was. But now, he would find out, and nothing in his empire would ever be the same again. The city buzzed with speculation. The media framed it as a cyberattack, an internal systems failure, a tragic anomaly in the otherwise flawless operation of Sullivan Enterprises. But those within the high-rise corridors of the company knew better. This was war. Someone had declared it from inside. For days, Jackson spiraled behind closed doors. Sleepless, colder than ever, his commands came clipped in brutal. The board was restless. Investors nervous. He met with security, each legal teams each bringing bad news. No trace of the culprit. No recovery of the lost data. And worst of all, the evidence suggested each was someone with access. Someone close. He began interrogating his own shadows. Loyalty meant nothing now. Everyone was a suspect. Even Elise. Especially Elise. But while he unraveled, she ascended. Elise didn't wait for an invitation. She walked into the PR office unannounced and requested every internal communication protocol. She then spent hours with the head of marketing, dissecting the optics of the crisis. She visited the logistics floor, the legal department, the risk assessment division. She asked questions precise, intelligent, unsettling. And she listened, because Elise Hartwell had stopped being a silent wife. She was building an empire of her own from the ashes of the one Jackson could no longer control. She started connecting dots others missed. A supplier name tied to an abandoned shell company. A PR manager who suddenly resigned after a decade of service. A data security subcontractor with suspicious gaps in its audit trail. Piece by piece, she mapped a network of betrayal. Jackson noticed her presence but too latch. He walked into a meeting room and found her seated at the head of the table. 8 executives, all male, all staring at her with a mixture of fear and awe. She stood without fear. Gentlemen, she said, her voice calm, this is no longer a matter of containment. It is a matter of transformation. They listened, because she wasn't speaking like a wife. She was speaking like a leader. And Jackson froze. He stood at the doorway, invisible in his own company, watching as Elise spoke with fluency and precision. She addressed the cybersecurity breach with a strategy that silenced the room. She proposed a restructuring model that preemptively blocked future infiltration. She outlined a media narrative that positioned the company as a phoenix rising, resilient, unbroken. When she finished, there was silence, then applause, not because of her title, but because she had earned it. Jackson didn't speak. Not there, not then. But later, as the city lights painted the penthouse in shades of golden regret, he stood behind her in the library, watching. You've been planning this, he said quietly. She closed the book she had been reading. You've been preparing, she replied. For what? He asked. For the moment you realized you were no longer alone at the top. He stepped closer. I never asked for help. No, she said, turning to face him. You asked for silence. For submission. But the world doesn't bend for kings anymore, Jackson. It listens till queens. He stared at her. Really saw her. The woman who had once walked beside him like a shadow now stood like a flame. There was no bitterness in her gaze. Only clarity. She wasn't fighting him. She was rising beyond him. I thought I had married a ghost, he said. I thought I had married a fortress, she replied. They stood in that space of truth, the silence no longer cold but charged. He reached out, then hesitated. She didn't move, because now, touch would have to mean something. You saved the company. He whispered. No, she said. I rebuilt it. While you tore it apart with suspicion and fear. He lowered his hand. She didn't turn away. I see you now, he said finally. Do you? She asked. Because the real question, Jackson, isn't whether you see me. It is whether you are ready for what it means. And with that, she left him standing in the room once built to keep her out. But it was hers now. All of it. The company, the future, even his heart. If he could prove he still had one. Jackson Sullivan couldn't sleep. He hadn't, really, in days. He told himself it was the crisis, the fallout from the breach, the restructuring, the pressure of saving an empire built on precision and fear. But deep down, he knew that wasn't it. What kept him awake was her, Elise. She was everywhere now, her voice echoing through conference calls, her name spoken with respect in rooms he used to dominate. Her presence at board meetings was no longer ornamental. It was central, strategic. The part that kept him awake the most, he didn't hate it. He was fascinated, haunted, because for the first time in his meticulously controlled life, Jackson Sullivan didn't know what to do. He did build his world with walls tall, cold, impenetrable. He did ensure no one ever got close. Emotion was a weakness, intimacy, a risk, love, a lie told by poets and fools. But Elise wasn't trying to love him, she was challenging him. In the terrified him more than any financial loss or public scandal. He watched her in the office from behind mirrored glass, saw the way she negotiated, with confidence, the way she owned the loyalty of those who once only bowed to him. She asked questions he hadn't considered. She solved problems faster than his most seasoned advisors. She did it all without seeking his approval. She didn't need him. In that realization cracked something inside him. He remembered the piano. That night she played, her fingers they see over ivory, her soul exposed in sound. He had watched her, from the shadows then, too, but he hadn't known what he was seeing. He hadn't allowed himself to feel it. Now he couldn't stop feeling. Every time he looked at her, his chest tightened, his mind raced. He'd never been good with emotion, never trained for it like he trained for war. But Elise wasn't a battlefield. She was a mirror. What she reflected back was a man who, despite all his wealth and power, had no idea how to be seen, how to be wanted for who he was, not what he controlled. One night, he returned home earlier than usual. The penthouse was quiet, the lights low. She sat at the dining table, going over documents, plans for a charity foundation under the Sullivan name, something he had approved years ago, then abandoned. She hadn't asked for his permission, she had simply revived it. He stood there, watching her for a moment too long. He's staring, she said, without looking up. He didn't deny it. He different, he said. So are you, she replied. He approached slowly, as if she were fire, because she was. He'd spent his life avoiding flames. Vi made mistakes, he said. She didn't respond. Vi been cruel, distant. I thought I was protecting something myself, maybe. But all I did was build a kingdom I didn't want to live in. She finally looked up. You don't have to say this. I do, he said, because I feel something I never felt before. I don't know what to do with it. Elise closed the file. Maybe, she said, you start by not trying to control it. He sat though across from her. Trying. I know, she said softly, that's why I haven't left. The words struck deep. She could have, easily. She had the power now, the influence, the admiration. She didn't need his name, his company, or his approval, but she stayed. And that meant something. Till Jackson, it meant everything. Why me? He asked, quietly. Why stay? She studied him, the man who had once been a statue of ice, now cracking, under the heat of his own heart. Because, she said, he finally becoming someone worth staying for. Silence fell. But it was no longer the silence of strangers. It was the silence of two people standing on the edge of something real. Jackson reached across the table, hesitant, trembling slightly. She took his hand, not because he was broken, but because he was trying to heal. And for the first time, Jackson Sullivan, the man who had once ruled alone, felt something stronger than fear, sharper than pride. He felt love, not possession, not power, but the terrifying, beautiful vulnerability of love. It changed everything. Rain tapped gently against the glass walls of the penthouse, soft and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Jackson sat alone in the dimly lit living room. He wasn't working, no phone in hand, no laptop glowing, just silence, the kind that used to comfort. Now unbearable. He had rehearsed the words 1,000 times, but now that each was chimmy, they dissolved on his tongue. Elise entered quietly, wrapped in a midnight blue hobby, hair damp from the shower. She paused when she saw him, expecting another night of distance, but there was something in his eyes. He looked afraid. She tilted her head. Plach. I need to tell you something, he said, rising slowly. I need you to let me finish. She nodded once, saying nothing. Jackson took a breath, one that trembled slightly. All my life, I've built walls, not just around my company, but around myself. I thought power meant isolation, that control meant strength, that love was noisy, a risk he couldn't afford. He stepped closer. But then you came in quiet, invisible, perfect for what I thought I needed. I chose you not for who you were, but for what I thought you would never become, a threat, a pause. His voice faltered. But you did become one. You became a threat to everything I thought I knew. Not because you challenged my business, but because you challenged me. Elise te move. Her expression was unreadable, calm, composed. I watched you transform, he continued, from the woman I thought I could ignore, into the woman I didn't stop thinking about. You made me see the cracks in my own empire. You made me feel things I never allowed myself to feel. For that, I blamed you. A flicker of pain passed through his eyes. I pushed you away, accused you, doubted you, aced you. You stayed. He took her hand, gently, reverently. Yemi, not asking for forgiveness. Yemi not even asking for love. Yemi just telling you the truth. He swallowed, voice barely a whisper now. I love you, Elise, and not because I need you, not because you make the company stronger, but because, for the first time in my life, I see something greater than power when I look at someone. He looked at her, fully, deeply. I see peace. She stood silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, she stepped back. Jackson felt it like a blade. She looked at him not with anger, but with gravity. Do you know what love means to me, Jackson? She asked. He said nothing. It means showing up every day, not just when everything falls apartamento. It means seeing someone before they become powerful. It means valuing them in silence, not only when the world claps. Her voice was calm, but laced with ash. I loved you before you ever saw me, she continued, but I had to become someone else for you to finally look. And now that you do, I don't know if I trust what you see. Jackson stepped closer, desperate. Then let me prove it. She shook her head, softly. Decide ter a boardroom deal, Jackson. DOS no pitch. No timeline. Decide ter something you fix with control. Her eyes shimmered not with tears, but with certainty. You finally feeling something real, in that seguir. But I need to know if you can live it, not just name it. He looked shattered. A man who had conquered everything, except the heart of the woman who mattered most. And now, she held his heart in her hands, but she wasn't breaking it. She was weighing it, carefully, quietly. He reached for her again, this time slower. Less a man of power, more a man stripped bare. She let him touch her hand. I don't want a throne, she said softly. I want a partner, in that is something no empire can buy. The silence stretched, and then she said it. I haven't decided yet. He nodded. It was more than he deserved, but enough. Till happy. Winter came quietly. The city transformed beneath frost-covered streets in soft, gray skies. A hush fell over Sullivan Enterprises. The press had stopped speculating. The internal chaos had stabilized. But within the walls of the penthouse, something far more profound was unfolding. Elise Hartwell had not given her answer. Weeks passed. She resumed her role, not as wife or figurehead, but as executive, architect, leader. Jackson waited. He didn't push, didn't demand, because for once in his life, he understood, some things could not be controlled. He began to change not in grand gestures, but in subtle ones. He showed up to meetings on time. He listened instead of commanded. He asked for opinions, not reports. He apologized when he made mistakes, even small ones. And most importantly, he saw her. Every time she entered a room, he looked up. Every time she spoke, he paid attention. He no longer tried to fix what was broken. He tried to grow what had been neglected. And slowly, the distance between them began to close. One evening, they attended a gala together. Not for business, not for appearance, but because Elise had chosen to go and Jackson had followed. The room froze when they entered. She wore black satin in power in her eyes. He wore humility behind his tailored armor, but each was their silence that spoke loudest. He didn't hold her hand. She didn't offer it. They didn't need to, because everyone could feel it, the shifting gravity, the quiet truth. She wasn't beside him. She wasn't behind him. She stood above him now, not in status, not in title, in grace. And he knew it. After the gala, they returned to the penthouse. Neither spoke. The city lights shimmered outside. The fireplace crackled with a soft. Jackson poured 2 glasses of wine. She took hers with a small nod. They sat in silence. Then, Elise turned to him. I made my decision. Jackson didn't breathe. She looked at him not with romance, not with fantasy but with clarity. I choose to stay. Relief washed through him, but she raised a hand before he could speak. On my terms, she said. Not as your wife, not as your partner in business, but as myself. He nodded, slowly. I want separate offices, she continued. Autonomy in strategy, control of the foundation I built, and no interference in my decisions. Done, he said without hesitation. E this US, she added, voice softer now. If each is going to be anything real, it has to grow without obligation. I don't tell you love, Jackson, you have to own it. He stepped closer. I will. I know, she said. In that moment, something shifted forever. Jackson Sullivan had lost his kingdom of control. He gained something far rarer. A woman who could walk away at any moment. He chose not to, because love, real love, is not submission. It is sovereignty. Elise Hartwell was now undeniably the queen of her own empire. The world would remember the name Sullivan, but history would remember the woman who made it mean something more. In so, in a world where power is currency and silence is often mistaken for weakness, she was, not because he allowed it, but because he underestimated her. What began as a marriage of convenience became a battle of identity, legacy, and control. In the end, the man who thought he had everything, learned what it truly meant to have nothing, until he risked everything to feel something real. But tell me, if you were in her place, would you have stayed? Would you have forgiven? Oh, would you have walked away at the very peak of your power? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Tell us, did Elise make the right choice? If the story gripped you as deeply as it gripped us, share it with a friend, with someone who needs to be reminded that silence is never submission, and that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one rewriting the ending. This was $1 Billion Curve. E we will be watching, always.